Hey everybody, it's Cameron. I'm going to show you 7 different ways to track lightsabers and DaVinci Resolve and stuff. Hey look, a lower third! You can find it in the description if you scroll down far enough. Now, tracking lightsabers has always been a pretty tedious process, but hopefully this video will give you some ways to do it in a new way and hopefully speed up your process, whether you're on the free or studio version. Now, jumping on into Resolve, we have a few different clips we're going to look at here. A couple of them I've already tracked and we're going to show exactly how we got to those points. But we're going to start on this one, courtesy of Casey Ferris, thank you very much, and the whole ground control team. You guys are beautiful people. Just going to move this over to make it easier to see. Now, the first thing we want to do anytime we go into Fusion and do anything with camera footage is we want to put it into a linear space because that's what Fusion natively works in. So I'm going to go ahead and select a media in, and the first thing we're going to add is a color space transform. And basically we're going to take this from camera space, which would be this, and into Rec 709 linear. Now you could go into DaVinci wide gamut, but the color space isn't really as important as the gamma, which is what Fusion is expecting. And then we can just make a copy of this color space transform, swap the inputs and outputs, and we'll just output to Rec 709 Gamma 24. Again, if you're going into a color grading space after this, you might want to go to DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate, but this is good for preview purposes for our sake right now. And just to be clear, we do want to work inside of these color space transforms, so we are working in linear. It will actually give us a better result on our track. So next I'm going to add just a normal tracker here. And the key to this effect is that we need 2 different tracking points. So I'm going to add a second IntelliTrack point. We will be using the point tracker in the next example, but all of these principles with the IntelliTrack still apply if you're using the free version. So I'm going to take my first point here and find the tip of the lightsaber right here. And then I'm going to bring my second one in and find the bottom of the lightsaber right here. And I'm just going to zoom in just to be sure by left and middle clicking and clicking, holding and dragging so that we can get a nice smooth zoom here, and just make sure we got it right where we want. And then I can press F to zoom all the way out. And then we're just going to track forward from current time here and see how far we can get with it. Now it seems to break apart there, so we're going to stop the track and find the last successful point of tracking here, which looks like it's right around here, somewhere around there, yes. And we're going to go back to where we started from. I'm going to just get these first frames here as well, just so we have a more completed track point here. It looks like it did a pretty good job here, except when we got to this point. Zoom in. Looks like the track lost right around here. Now we can adjust individual points if something flies off track, and that's pretty simple to do. We can even move this tracker thing out of the way because all we need to do is just grab our point here. And then if we need to go to the next frame to move the next point, we just press and we drag and move it to the bottom. Now all we're trying to get, especially if anything obscures the lightsaber, we just want to make sure we get the back in front of it from what's visible. And now in this instance, there's going to be several frames where we're not really going to get the track that we want. So we'll have to do some manual adjustments. So we're just going to find the point where we can potentially continue the track, which is probably around here. So we'll just put our tracker points back to where they originally were, making sure that we keep the correct order. That is important. So we'll put the first point here and the second point down here. And we'll see if we can keep continuing to track forward from the current time. And it looks like we got a pretty reasonable track here. Let's just preview it here. And there might have been a couple frames that fell off on there, but we can easily compensate. We can see exactly where it sort of zooms back into place, which is right there. So we'll just go ahead and I'll speed this process up of just reframing each one of these. And that looks like those are fixed. And now we have the frames that we don't really feel super confident in tracking because it goes behind. So we'll just go to the point where it catches up. And so now that we're just going to be doing manual tracking, let's go ahead and make it less confusing. So let's just go ahead and disable one of the tracks so we can just see one of them at a time. And we'll go ahead and skim frame by frame until we notice it pop off, which is right here. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this point. And we can just get that tracker out of the way, and we'll move these points. And you can tell which frame it's on because the current point that it's pointing to will have these arrows on it, so that shows that it's the current frame.
There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was the Billy O.
One important thing to note is that on this point, we can see that the lightsaber pops out just a little bit right here, so I'm just going to track that point here as well. And in a case where we have a lot of motion blur, typically trying to find the middle point of that motion blur is the best option.
The winds blew harder, bowed it down.
And with that one, it should catch up and start to connect, and it looks like it does. And now to correct the second point.
Below me, bully boys blow. Soon may the weathermen come to bring.
And once again with this point, because this is the earliest part that's showing, we're not trying to guess exactly where it is. We only want the parts that are showing.
Sugar and tea and rum.
And with that, it looks like we got a complete track here. So if we highlight both of these, zoom out, we watch all the way through, it looks like both points stick to that lightsaber pretty well. Oh, except for one point that I missed apparently. There we go. That's better. And now how do we use these points? Well, it's actually somewhat simple. We're just going to add a background in front of this color space transform here, just by clicking on the color space transform and then clicking on the background node here. And then on this background, we're just going to add a polygon node. We're just going to go and make this background white as well, just for ease of use. And with this polygon, we just need to make 2 points. Doesn't matter where they are, because that's irrelevant. And then we'll just make sure we switch to insert and modify just so we can select the points. So I'm going to select the first point here, right click, polygon 1 polyline, go to publish, publish to, tracker 1, position. And now we can do the same thing with the other point, just highlight it, right click, polygon 1 polyline, icon words, publish, publish to, and then the track point 2 path. And now we see that the polygon is basically bound to the lightsaber here. And then in order to make the background show up, we just add some border width. And then we can see we have a track here. And this is why we also didn't want to have it show the rest of it in between, because then we would have to mask that out, and this just saves some masking time. And then if we needed to go back for any reason and fix any of the tracking points, we can always just go back to the tracker itself and then find that point and move it, and it fixes it for the polygon as well. And then in the polygon, we can do things like add motion blur, so that it looks like it's actually moving with it, maybe add a little bit of color to it as well. And if we wanted to add some glow to it, we have options like either glow or soft glow. Either one works, and you can pick and choose as you want. We can throw glow in here and reduce the size, add the glow so that it gets that hot bar center. And we can even just use the glow as the color if we want to make the background pure white, and then go to the color scale of the glow and bring down the green and red scale, and then we got blue there as well. There's a number of ways to do it. That's one way with glow. We can also try the soft glow here. Again, with the color scale, just bringing down green and red, bringing down glow size just a bit, make it really shine. And if we watch that through, doesn't look half bad. And again, you can play with different parameters with, if you wanted to add a little bit of soft edge to the polygon itself, play with the color of the background and maybe add a little bit of supporting colors. You can do whatever you want. But that's method number 1. Now we're going to move on to the next clip here, which adds a little bit more strategy in how you would actually even shoot this in the first place. So let's go ahead into Fusion here. I have some of this already built out, but I'm just going to go ahead and take away everything but the color space transforms, highlight all of them, control click the color space transform. I'm just going to shift this off so we can see what we're actually looking at. Now we have this very cheap plastic lightsaber, and it has tracking points on it. Let me press F to full screen that. And I also just ended up using a higher shutter speed so that when it moves really fast, we don't have any motion blur. And this can make your tracking easy, and then we can just add some motion blur back in post. Now granted, it's not going to look as good as if you had natural motion blur, but we can still work with it. So again, the first thing, I just make sure I go from camera space to Rec 709 linear, and then we just have a preview of Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 for the preview output. So we're going to work in linear, and I'm going to go ahead and just add a tracker here. And instead of a teletrack, we're going to use the point tracker, and I'm going to add 2 of them here. Now, if you're on the free version, this will be 0.1 and 0.2, and you know, I love discrepancies because they're so fun to explain. All right, so we're going to bring in our track center here, just find the center. We can also look at our preview right here on the side to see exactly what we're looking at. We basically just want to get this point by itself. Now, because this moves a lot, we're going to want to make this a pretty big box because from frame to frame it can move pretty significantly. Another way you can mitigate this is if you shoot at a higher frame rate and then either slow it down in post or you just play it back at a higher speed, especially if you're shooting at a higher shutter speed anyways and planning on adding motion blur in post. You can potentially get away with that. And that would make this track a little bit easier. But we are going to make a large scanning area. Now for this one, this side doesn't move as much. And once again, I'm going to just get this plus inside of here. Don't have to scan as big of an area because this side doesn't move quite as much. Now I want to talk a little bit about the adaptive modes in the path center real quick because that actually does help in this case. Now to understand what the adaptive mode is doing, if it's set to none, then that means whatever this original rectangle pattern is what it's going to look for in every single frame that it's tracking. However, if we switch it to every frame, that means for every frame that it tracks, it gathers a new pattern, so to speak. So for example, on the next frame, it's going to look for this exact pattern. On the frame after that, it'll look for the new frame that it just scanned, and so on and so on. It'll keep doing that for every frame. Sometimes that can help if there are slight changes in the pattern as it's scanning through. However, if there are some changes that are really drastic or change the pattern entirely, we can choose best match. Now best match functions basically exactly the same as every frame except with a caveat with this match tolerance control. Basically it means that if the difference between this frame and this frame exceeds this threshold amount, then it won't generate a new pattern for the next frame. It'll use the same one as before. And this can be helpful if you have like a sudden flash of light or a shadow crosses over something, then you can tell it not to generate a new frame and look for that new pattern because you don't want it to track that light all of a sudden or track that shadow and then lose your pattern entirely. And then path center is more for if the pattern you're tracking leaves the frame. If that pattern ends up coming back into frame and it's basically original state, then you would want to keep it on pattern center. If it goes off the frame and it doesn't really come back or comes back obscured and it's not the same pattern essentially, then you would go with track center so it looks for the new pattern and then can continue the track to the end. So now that I have my points set, I'm going to go ahead and track from this time, and that one completed. We'll go back to that original frame that we started at and then track backwards. And there we go. Looks like we got a pretty solid track all the way through. We can just go and skim through it real quick just to be sure. But it looks like it held on pretty solidly. Now I know I've already added these here, but I'm just going to do it again just for the sake of example. Color space transform, add a background, I'm going to make it solid white. I'm going to add a polygon here, make the 2 points, select the insert and modify. Like the first point, polygon to polyline, it'll be 1 for you most likely, publish 2, and of course I got 6 because I kept the original tracker in there, but you know, it's here. And then same thing with the other point. Go to publish 2, the other one. And then of course we increase our border width. And now there's a couple other fixes I want to talk about here. So as you can see, as we move, it tracks pretty great to the lightsaber here, but we do have some poker outs at the end here. And there's a couple ways we can fine tune that. One way is if we go into the polygon modifiers, we can see both points here. I'm going to pin them both so we can actually see the parameters for both. But something I found that works for a somewhat quick and dirty fix is if I set an expression on the Z rotation for either one, it doesn't really matter which one, and then I drag it onto the other Z rotation, then we're able to kind of tilt the points in a certain way. And then the other thing I can do with these is if I go to a point, let's just go to here, and I just want to adjust the center to make sure it overlaps and covers that whole thing entirely. Maybe bring it up here a little bit, and then make sure I cover the bottom of this one down here. That looks pretty good. I can keyframe this Z rotation right here. And as it comes down to a point where it lands, let's say right here, I can modify that Z rotation to kind of match the rotation that the lightsaber was doing until it starts moving up again. So let's go ahead and set a keyframe right here, right where it starts moving up. Go to the point where it stops, which is right around here. And then as it goes back down, we'll set a keyframe as it starts. So that's right here. Modify that, and it basically stays there. So we have the compensation, and if we want to smooth out that compensation so it doesn't skew at all, like from right here, we can see it's just moving linearly. We can make sure we have this selected, go to spline, and we're going to show only selected tools so that we see just our Z rotation on the polygon here. We can disable everything else. Just select Z rotation, and then we'll show zoom to fit. Just click in this box, press Control A to highlight everything, and then press F. And that'll smooth the points out so that now it kind of matches the ease of the lightsaber as it moves. So that can be a quick way to finish some angle or positional issues. So let's go ahead and get rid of the spline here. And then we can just add our soft glow, go to tools, and then just bring down the red and green scale just a touch to give it a slight blue glow if we need it. And then we can bring the blue scale up, and that'll create a brighter blue outer ring. And again, you can just play with these as you want. And then with this polygon 2, again, we can enable motion blur so that as it moves, we get a little bit of extra motion on it. But now in order to add some motion blur to the footage itself, we're only going to really notice this in the hands, but let's just go ahead and drag these back. We want to add these not on the actual glow of the lightsaber, but behind the lightsaber. So we're going to put it right after the camera, but not after the glow. So with this color space transform selected, we're just going to shift space, and we're going to add an optical flow, and this is available in the free version as well. And I found it actually looks a little bit better than the motion blur plugin anyways. And then we're going to do the vector motion blur. And even just a default option still looks pretty good. And you're going to notice that this is going to be very taxing on your system as well. So in order to fix that and actually have a solid preview, we're going to use what's called a saver node. So we're going to put this after our vector motion blur, again, not after the lightsaber because we still want to be able to modify that later. We're going to click on the vector motion blur, shift space, and we're going to add a saver. And a saver is basically a rendered image sequence that can play back a lot faster and a lot easier than something where it has to keep calculating and recalculating and re-rendering every frame. So with this saver, it's not actually looking at any of the effects over here. It's only looking at what it's going into it. So we're going to go ahead and just hit browse. We're going to find some place that we want to put it. I'll just call this motion blur. And then in order to render this, we just go up to Fusion and we render all savers. And this will basically act as a pre-rendered effect, so it doesn't have to constantly load it. It just is looking at a pre-rendered image sequence. Perfect. And then once that's done, we can disconnect this saver and basically everything behind it. I'm going to move this forward so it's easier to see. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use a loader node. And that's basically like the brother of the saver node. So we can click on any one of these EXRs that we just made. It doesn't matter which one. They will all load the same thing. So we can click open. And if your comp does not start at frame 0, you're going to want to copy the first frame that is in the comp, which is in this case 238. And you're just going to paste that into the hold first frame. And then we're going to connect it into the merge. And now we have a pre-rendered comp that now plays back much easier. And if we preview this, we can see that we've only rendered the original image, not any of the effects that we placed over here. Also, as a side note, the OpenEXR format that it saves it in also supports alpha channels. But because we didn't do this on the effect, we can still modify different aspects of the lightsaber on top of the pre-rendered comp, and it still tracks just fine. And then with this last example, I'm not going to show the whole steps all over again. I'm just going to show a couple things where sometimes that motion blur can be a really annoying aspect, and sometimes you have to do stuff that's a little bit outside of the box. I mean that figuratively and literally. But for this one, there's a lot of cases where I had to manually track the points here, especially as it goes over and out. If it goes outside of the frame, 1, you will have to manually track it, but 2, you don't necessarily need to have it exactly at the point where the lightsaber's tip is. You just need to have it at a point where it's going to match, and then you can just keep doing that all the way around. And sometimes motion blur can also leak out a little bit of the lightsaber that was behind it. So you can go back and somewhat reduce the shutter angle of the blur so that it's not quite as prevalent, and that way you can better hide the stuff that was behind it if you find that the shutter angle is too high and it makes it too blurry to where you can see the lightsaber behind it. And then for this opening part where I had the lightsaber actually opening up, if I just turn this merge off, we can see what exactly we're working with here. But a lot of times the tracker won't actually track this, so in order to do that, after you've made the tracking points, you can just manually drag the points like so. And then when you're on the frame where the lightsaber isn't on, you can just keyframe this level parameter inside the polygon, and this will make it show or not show. So hopefully this video gave you some practical tips on how you can save time with lightsaber tracking with various different methods, whether it's how you're shooting it or how you're tracking it. And if you have any questions or issues that you run into with these methods, please let me know down in the comments. And also, if you'd like to learn Fusion from a fundamental perspective, you can check out these courses from Casey Ferris called the 9 Nodes You Need to Make Almost Anything in Fusion and the Fusion Survival Guide, both linked in the description. And if you find you like those and you want to really dive into Fusion and all that it has, there's the Fusion Zero to Hero course, and I actually have an exclusive 10% off discount code. Just use code CAMTIM at checkout. The ground control team that created it was kind enough to supply the discount code for you guys, so take advantage of that, and it does add a little bit of support for me as well. But in all seriousness, the 2 free courses I highly recommend. It will give you a really good solid starting point to learning Fusion, understanding how it works, and I'm really excited to see what you guys make out of this tutorial as well. And if you want to dive even further into Resolve and all that it has, I go over every single page of Resolve in this crash course right over here. My hand was blocking. And then there's this video over here. I don't know what it is, but it might be good. Or it might not. The only way to find out is to click. This is Camera Tim, signing out.
Subscribe.
Or don't.